Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. This is also for the Site Owner Academy. The topic today is why it's never been a better time to be a research-naive physician that is looking to do their first clinical trial. So there's a lot going in your favor, no matter the industry. When you're embarking on a new business endeavor, the thing that you want to focus on is the timing of the market, the overall timing, because that's the one thing that we can't control. So, in right now, and at the end of 2020, and a lot of it has to do with COVID, but there's a lot of studies. There's like tons of studies out there, and the research industry needs patience. I mean, even before there was tons of studies, so like pre-pandemic or even like in a more slow time, like 2015, 2014, there were less studies, much less studies than there are now, but we still weren't getting enough patient accrual in these studies. I think something like 90% of studies were behind on enrollment. So now we haven't really made a dent in the patient accrual area. We just added more studies. So, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that the numbers just are not going to add up. And we need more research naive physicians, especially the ones that actually treat patients, because they can provide patient accrual. And that's really the name of the game. So if you are a new physician or if you're a site owner worried about getting in with a new physician, starting a site with a new physician, I mean, you're lucky because the market is in your favor, and that's not always the case. We just happen to be in a period of time where there's a lot of clinical trials. So what do you think about this, Chris?
Well, I would pose a couple questions to you. So one, you often hear sponsors say they're looking for research-naive patients. Do you think that's lip service, or do you think that's genuine?
It's genuine. The best data can be extracted from research-naive patients because
And
these are
thus,
patients that haven't been exposed to investigational products in the past.
okay, and would you say it's a fair assumption to make if as a sponsor you're taking on a research-naive physician, you're probably getting research-naive patients as well?
Yes.
So,
If the research-naive physician has their own private practice.
right.
That's the
And
big tip, and that's the key.
and I think I would agree with that.
Yeah. So from the sponsor's perspective, I mean, good segue because the next slide, it's all about sponsor perspective. There's a lot of studies that are scheduled to be starting. I mean, it says after the pandemic ends, but these studies are already starting. So these studies, fourth quarter, third quarter of 2020, fourth quarter of 2020, these studies have started. Chris, we just got a new study for one of our sites, and Monica screened the first patient there today in a long time.
Yeah, that's great.
And so the monitor visits have been virtual because it's still technically not safe to travel, but that's changing. That's going to change soon, and then it's going to be business as usual with the monitoring visits and all that. But the studies have started, and the studies are going to continue to start. It's true that there is a lot of research studies that have not started yet because sponsors are waiting for things to get better and it to be safer to travel and all that kind of stuff. And we still have a lot of studies out there. So imagine what it's going to be like when a vaccine rolls out and people feel safer about traveling, right? Restrictions get lifted. I mean, it's never been a better time. It's not hyperbole. I've been in this industry since 2005. I've never seen it better for research-naive physicians, as long as you have the patient population.
While I would completely agree with that, I still think it's a little bit more difficult for research-naive physicians than those with experience, slightly. But certainly it's a better time now than, say, 2 years ago for research
Oh,
naive
of course.
physicians.
You're always going to be at a disadvantage if you're a research naive physician when you compare yourself to an experienced research
Right,
physician,
right.
but it's never been less important
Completely
for
agree.
it to not
Completely
happen.
agree. Yep, yep. I just,
And
I didn't,
sponsors,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I was
I
just
was
going to
just
say,
going to say
I didn't want
sponsors are.
to.
There's a delay, Chris. Let's see. Okay, sponsor. I'm going to read it this last bullet point.
Sure.
Sponsors are sending out record number of feasibility surveys, and this we can both confirm from our business development. So if you're interested in that, text me 949-415-6256. We offer a low monthly charge for business development, but we see lots of feasibility surveys.
Absolutely.
And then what were you going to say?
I mean, it's not all that big a deal, but I was just going to say I didn't want to mislead any research naive physicians that may be listening. You know, much easier now than usual. However, it's still going to be a little bit more difficult for you opposed to a research experienced physician. I just don't want to mislead
Right.
anybody, was my point.
Right. Well, exactly. We're not. Yeah, a good point. Because the next slide is going to explain why we feel this way,
Right.
and it's all about recruitment, which we've been discussing. But let's go into it in a little more detail. So, like I explained in the beginning, with more studies, obviously we need more patients. There's just no way around that.
Yep.
And the current research PIs are not even able to keep up with the current number of studies. So, I mean, not just from the patient accrual, but even from like a staffing perspective, right? But I don't want to overcomplicate this presentation, but we're going to focus primarily on recruitment. But even from a staffing and human resources perspective, these existing sites are getting a lot of studies, and they're having a hard time keeping up with the demand. So that makes it very attractive for research naive physicians or sites. Hopefully, not everyone at the site is research naive. Hopefully, if you have a research naive physician, you have a somewhat experienced coordinator to kind of offset the balance there. And that is a good situation because the coordinators are the backbone of the study. So if you have an experienced coordinator but a research naive PI, the coordinator can definitely do a lot of the heavy lifting and kind of lead the PI in the right direction. Would you not agree?
Well, I completely agree with that. 130%. Of course, there's
Under
no
30.
130.
Wow.
Of course, there's no 130, but I'm just trying to emphasize I agree with you. However, sometimes I don't know if that translates over to sponsors, right?
Right.
I think it does with some, but some I don't think that matters, right? Um, where it certainly matters even less is when the reverse is true. You have an experienced physician in research, but you have a research naive coordinator. I don't think that matters at all to most sponsors because again
Mm-hmm.
they're looking at the PI and they leave it up to the
Right.
PI to delegate who's going to do what.
Right. They do leave it up to the PI. I agree with you on a surface level. They only care about the PI, but during the site selection visit, having an experienced coordinator can definitely make the difference between them awarding the site that study and them not,
Oh, sure.
right?
When you have the
Because
coordinator
in a
sitting there
time like
after.
exactly, because in a time like now, it's just a huge demand for more sites. I mean,
Hmm.
we like this is the largest amount of supply of studies we've ever had in the industry, and there's just no way around that. It's a numbers game, and it's supply and demand. The age old supply and demand uh, applies to research as well, guys. Let me break it to you. Supply and demand, also those dynamics, also apply to research.
Yep.
You want to read anything on this slides that we haven't covered?
No.
Oh, okay.
Did we
That's a
cover
fun topic.
everything? I wasn't really reading along. I was just listening to you. Did we cover everything?
I didn't read. I didn't read the slides.
All right. Well, let's just go through the bullet points real
Research
quick.
naive physicians typically see their own patients and have access to a large pool of patients. These physicians also tend to have closer relationships to their patients and can oversee patient progress throughout a clinical trial. So, and this, we can go to the next slide too, because it continues with recruitment, right? One of the most significant consequences of the pandemic is there's less sites. So the previous bullet point about the physicians having trust with their patients also applies to diversity in research. There's a huge push for diversity, getting minority patients enrolled in
Mm-hmm.
studies.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a physician, first of all, if you're a minority physician treating minority patients, it's really never been a better time. We can do this like double for you. It's never been a better time squared for you to get into research because sponsors need minority patients in studies, and they realize, because of companies like ours and others, that the best way to do that is to get the physicians that treat those patients in the communities to do research.
Yep.
And especially if they're minority clinicians themselves. If you're African American clinician and you're in a minority neighborhood, chances are you're seeing a lot of minority patients, and they tend to resonate more with them because it's the same ethnicity, same background. It's just human nature. That's another law that applies besides supply and demand is the laws of human nature. That applies to research as well, guys and gals. What do you think about this? We're seeing a lot of push from pharma now for minorities.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a dozen years, something like that, and I've never seen anything like this in terms of the push for diversity.
Me either. We just started Latinos in clinical research because of this. We
Yep.
want to empower the Latinos in clinical research who are already working in the industry or want to work in the industry from all facets of the industry, site, sponsor, CRO, vendor, etc. Because at the end of the day, we want to enroll more Latinos in research, the patients.
Mm.
And there's other groups doing this for African Americans. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a great way to get more minority participation and reduce disparities in research when it comes to participation.
Yep. Completely agree.
What else is on this slide, Chris, that you like?
Let's see. Did we cover all three bullet points? I think you only covered the first one, right? Additionally, most principal investigators have exhausted their typical recruitment streams. This is partially because 2019 had a lot of studies and study supply was already trending upward. And we pretty much have covered that. Yep.
That is absolutely true. And 2019 is nothing in comparison to 2020 as far as the number of studies that are out there, mainly due to COVID. There's a lot of COVID studies,
Mm-hmm.
which were not there in 2019, but also a lot of new studies too. I mean, take COVID out of the mix if we can, just hypothetically. 2020, I think, would have been bigger than 2019 as far as study supply. In my opinion, it would have at least matched it, but I think it would have pushed it further.
Right. Right. I agree. Then the last bullet point in terms of recruitment, clinical research is always behind, and that's absolutely true. What percentage of studies would you say are behind behind on their end date? 90%?
I don't know the current, yeah, I don't know the current number, but that figure was just recently was 90%. The
Right.
real question is, and we don't have the data yet because this year is not over. This year is never ending, guys. It's just gonna continue. But this year is not over, so we don't have the data on this. But the question is, has COVID putting the spotlight on clinical research helped or not as far as patient sentiment about clinical trial participation? And I don't know. I mean, the jury's still out on that one.
Right. Yeah. Completely agree. All right. Next slide.
Yeah, next slide. You want to read this one?
All right, new physicians needed. So this gets back to the research naive. Um, Patients don't want to go to the research for fear of contracting the virus. I don't know how true that is. I'm sure that's true for some. Um,
Right.
I know for studies that we're still seeing patients for, they don't seem to have any concerns coming to the clinic.
Right. It depends on the indication. You have oncology, you have like Alzheimer's, the more at risk. Um,
True.
there was a time, and I think, we're getting into the fall and the winter soon, so we might see a little bit of that again in the winter, with the cases spiking and all that stuff. But this is gonna end, guys. I mean, the vaccine's gonna come out. Even though coronavirus is never going away, it's always gonna mutate. But people are just gonna get used to it, and hopefully there's enough viruses out there that are effective. We already know there's treatments that are effective. Way less people are dying now than they were in the spring. So I think this is going to become less and less of an issue going forward. But it definitely was a huge issue in the spring and in the summer even.
Initially, sure.
Hmm.
All right, so this fear may linger even after the pandemic is over. You just covered that. New physicians who enter clinical research could encourage new patients to participate and close the enrollment gap. And absolutely, um,
Yep.
yeah, we
Especially
can.
with minorities and diversity, especially so.
Yep. And then new physicians have the opportunity to meet sponsor expectations and establish themselves in the research industry. Yeah, that's what we've been saying since we started this presentation.
And it's one of our core founding principles of why we even started our site network.
Yep.
At the time, it wasn't really to enroll minorities. We weren't thinking about that. It was just getting more patients in studies. But now, with the push for more minorities, now that we've been alerted to how big of an issue the lack of diversity is in research, we're really targeting clinicians in minority areas or minority clinicians, period, to get them to do research. And we've been having a good amount of success, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a sponsor listening, you want to reach out to me or Chris. 949-415-6256. You can never plug your services enough. This is an important issue. Is
Is
there
there any more?
anything else?
Is there any more slides? Nope, that was the last slide.
I think we cover everything. It's a good site owner academy. Now we will stop recording and go to the private Q&A that we have with our site owners in the Site Owner Academy.